the news today about the game in England at Wembley Stadium. We know about Dublin, and heck, one of these days, maybe it's somewhere else. Kansas is renovating their stadium. It won't be quite ready yet, so it makes some sense. But do you like them spreading their wings?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. Losing a home game is substantial, but I do think, losing a home game for the sake of the conference to a degree is a good thing. And yeah, I think you pointed it out. The stadium is not going to be fully finished next year anyways. So if you're going to lose a home game, initially, and I don't know why I thought that the east side of the stadium would be completely finished by the time next season rolled around. I mean, so you basically have like 60 to 75% of the stadium currently done. What's funny was Lance Leipold, we were interviewing last week, and his comment was, when I asked about the stadium, he's like, yeah, it's really great, except that like from my sideline, it looks like the old stadium because he's staring across at the east side of the stadium, which is the exact old part of the stadium that he's looking at. So basically, once the season ends, they're going to remove the last part of the old stadium, that east side, the bleachers, and I mean they're building out, basically closing the stadium with the new bleachers, and then there's going to be a hotel, a convention center. It's going to be unbelievable when it's all done. But next year they're going to be reduced capacity in order to get that done. So yeah, I think with that being part of it, with being the first college football game ever at Wembley Stadium. I mean, we're so used to now in football, Wembley Stadium being a part of the National Football League. So to be a part of a game for the first time ever over there, I think it's all a big deal. And, it'll be really interesting too, because we've had these Dublin games as part of week 0. This is more in the middle of the season. And so, I'm assuming Kansas and Arizona State will have the bye. But it's two, emerging brands in college football, I would say. It's huge for the Big 12. I think it's good news. If it's one of those, Smokey, if it's good for the geese, it's good for the gander kind of things.
Mm-hmm. It makes more sense to me than basketball in Mexico right now.
Yeah.
Right now, I think that's an easier sell than that, which, and again, I know that's in the back burner, but look, the people in London are getting behind, oblong football. Like they enjoy it. Right?
I remember being in San Antonio and covering the Spurs, and they were playing a game in Mexico City once, and the game got delayed because the stadium was on fire. That's not a joke. That happened. So it was like, oh, they're not going to play tonight because there's too much smoke in the locker rooms. Like, yeah, I would think so. So Paul, to your point, if that's a good indication of why, maybe basketball in Mexico doesn't make the most sense. And that's, to your point, ultimately what you're saying is like, you're not giving up a game at Allen Fieldhouse for that, but at, David Booth Memorial Stadium, which is again, not going to be fully done yet. It makes a ton of sense. So I just think the timing of it works. I think it's a big deal for the conference, and, and hopefully, I'm pretty sure Arizona State's going to be a very good program, and I think Kansas will too at that point in time next year. So we'll see what both these teams look like, but it should be a really good game. And yeah, it's clear that football is working in London in a way that, they're playing multiple games now. You have who is it was in Dublin last week and now is now playing a game in London this week. So, think about playing 2 consecutive games in Europe. It just shows the growth, and potential of the sport over there. They play at Wembley, they play at Tottenham. So they're, the NFL is playing in multiple locations. I think it's about time the college football woke up to that too. And look, Brett Yormark is so proactive about finding the best opportunities for the Big 12 internationally, and this is one of them.
So Ari, looking back, but also looking ahead, because we're on a Wednesday. So we're in that spot where it's like turning the page. A couple of really interesting results last week that lead into this week. Iowa State handled their business, but Cincinnati beating Kansas in that thriller of a game. Kansas has a chance to get the pick. And it's all, this is a crazy Big 12 style game, but it now leads into the Cincinnati-Iowa State showdown, where Cincinnati's been favored when I've looked at the odds at times this week. But it also sets up, I feel like, a very important game for Kansas down in Orlando to kind of make sure they're still on pace. So I guess my question is just kind of your thoughts on Cincinnati and Kansas both coming out of that game, where that sort of places things as we enter this week 6 here.
Have you guys been to Stadium Swim at Circa in downtown Vegas?
No. Looks cool, though.
Yeah, that was where I was in Vegas for the Raiders-Bears game this weekend, and Chicago Bears, that is. And so we went on Saturday morning to watch the Jayhawks play at 9 a.m. And it was like Stadium Swim's awesome. It's super cool. But it was not fun to watch that game. And all the money that I bet on that game, very confident that Kansas was going to win that game. But I digress. No, I think that game said a lot more about Cincinnati than it did about Kansas. And, I think we actually interviewed Scott Satterfield today for an interview that will play tomorrow. And it feels like this was the biggest win that he's had since he's been at Cincinnati. They just were in need of one of these wins. It's like with Cincinnati, it was like all the games they were supposed to lose, they lost, and they just didn't have any wins that you didn't expect them to. And that was just kind of the Scott Satterfield MO so far for his time at Cincinnati. They finally have the weapons. I think one of the things that was prevailing from Satterfield and even Sorsby to a degree at Big 12 Media Days was, we just haven't had the pieces. Sorsby didn't make these excuses, but I think Satterfield did. Like, we just didn't have the weapons and the ability to get open down the field. And over time, that led to Sorsby becoming more reliant on his legs and less reliant on, throwing the football. And I think it completely derailed the season for them last year. And this year, they've got the pieces. They would not have been able to win a game last year without Dante Corleone, who missed the entire game, and Joe Royer, who broke Travis Kelce's single season catch record at Cincinnati last season. So it just goes to show you the amount of depth and ability that this team has. When you looked at the splits between what they were on the field versus the run and defensively with Corleone versus without, it's sort of inexcusable for Kansas to not be better, especially running the football without Corleone in this game. But credit Tyson Veit and the Cincinnati defense for coming up with a game plan. They gave up a ton of yards, don't get me wrong, and a ton of points, but I don't think the running game for Kansas was nearly what you expected, especially given, that without Corleone, they should have been able to run the ball more effectively. I think the story of this game more than anything was, Jalen Daniels is a really good quarterback for Kansas. He has, in many ways, rewritten the record books. He's only the second player in the history of college football to play at one school for 6 years. He is, and very much defines this new era of Kansas football, but he makes some brutal mistakes in games that are costly. And as much as Jalen Daniels, giveth, Jalen Daniels taketh. He had a fumble with 4 minutes to go in this game. At the 1 yard line, you just can't have that. You can't have a 60-year quarterback who's supposed to be experienced and smart and good. You just have to know game, score, time, situation. And like, I get it, you're trying to make a play, but you just can't fumble in the 1 yard line in a close game like that. And to me, it was very reminiscent of games last year where Kansas just lost during the stretch of games because it felt like Daniels was trying to do too much and the offense just didn't click. And it was the Arizona State game all over last year. So I think this game said a ton about Cincinnati. Brennan Sorsby was dealing. He was so good, whether it was running the football in certain situations. He knew exactly what he needed to do. They've got great weapons now, I think, that can overcome, missing a certain guy. Royer left the game in this early and didn't return, and they were fine. And then again, to do it without Corleone says a lot. Now, Tyson Veit's a former Iowa State coach, defensive coach. So it'll be really interesting to see. And I even asked Satterfield about what's the differences between a John Haycock 3-3-5 and a Tyson Veit 3-3-5. And, he said that there's some, certainly some concepts that are similar, but, Iowa State now losing their top two corners. We've already seen them this year. I don't want to say abandon the 3-3-5, but they're doing a lot more with their 4-down linemen. And even more so, I'd imagine now that they lose both Jeremiah Cooper, who didn't play in the game on Saturday, and then they lose John Tez Williams during the game. Both to ACL injuries, just brutal for a team that had so many injuries at linebacker. So this is a big time game, very underrated game. And we'll see, just how good of a measuring stick this is for Cincinnati. And on the other side, to your point, can UCF bounce back after a really disappointing loss to a K-State team that hadn't really showed any life until the game on Saturday? And, how much of a step back has Kansas taken? I think we expect UCF to be at the bottom of the league, and maybe this is one of those games that shows which of these two teams will be kind of bottom third of the league.
Yeah, Ari, I mentioned this yesterday, and because of Williams, and we want to check on a couple other games too. But Cincinnati went from a 1.5 underdog to a 3.5 point underdog to a favorite. like in the last 24 hours.
That's
and I
wild.
guess it's because of the injuries that obviously, plus they look really good with what they did in their win against KU.
I mean, it's interesting because normally the lines are dictated, specifically through injuries by quarterbacks. It's weird for lines to change that much without quarterback play, but I think that says a ton about those two guys. And I think to your point, Smokey, like people are jumping on Cincinnati, realizing how good they are. And, I think the one thing is like Iowa State is losing impactful corners, but it feels like they've just always been able to have the personnel to overcome these kinds of losses. And, so while losing those guys is going to be impactful, I still feel like, schematically, they've just figured it out. It's sort of like Utah in a way where it's like, it doesn't really matter who the personnel are. They just figure it out and get it done. I do like Iowa State to win this game despite that, because I still think they've got, if not the best quarterback in the Big 12, one of the 2 or 3 best quarterbacks in the Big 12. They've got such a robust and I think multifaceted offense. They whether it's Carson Hansen or Abu Sama, whether it's getting their tight ends involved. I mean, they last year they were so reliant on their 2 receivers who are big time players, but I think this year they're just able to do so many different things. Like they're very well balanced. They're tough to defend. And, I worry about the status of Corleone. Again, Kansas didn't really make Cincinnati pay on the ground for not having Corleone. If he's out again this week, I think Carson Hansen and Abu Sama are 2 guys that can really feast, because I don't think that they're going to miss the opportunity with Taylor Mauser to take advantage of Cincinnati being without Dante Corleone. So, and then, there's Joe Royer, who Satterfield told us he feels pretty good about Royer being able to go this week. It sounded like he felt less good about Corleone coming back this week. So I think, this is a big one to watch for the injury report, because, we know that the 2 corners for Iowa State are out, but what about Corleone? What about Royer for Cincinnati on that side?
Paul, one more question.
Kansas State, how much did they get themselves right?
I mean, let's see what happens this week, right?
Yeah.
It was the best sign yet for K-State to be back, if you will. I think there are 2 things. One, Dylan Edwards being healthy. Like, this is what we expected. He just hasn't been healthy. And so if he is able to put another game forward, that's huge. I also think they finally settled on the right 5 offensive linemen. They've been kind of figuring that out. It has not looked good, but they finally, it feels like, settled on the right 5 offensive linemen that really played into it. And look, I mean, this was a glimpse of what we expected, but they had not shown any life all year. So, I mean, if it happens in one game, it's an exception. If it happens in multiple games, 3-4 games, now you start to see some trends. The first trends for K-State did not bode well, but if what they did on Saturday continues this week, then I think that's a trend that's, puts them right back in the race towards the top of the Big 12. I know they've got, the 1 loss already in conference play, but to me, it's what life are they showing, and the ability to play, significantly better with their ground game, get their offensive line rolling. Like, that's K-State football. That was not anything close to what we had known K-State to be these last few years. But what we saw on Saturday was what we expected this year. And if it continues, then I think, that's a good trend for K-State that shows that they could very well be competing, for conference championship, like many expected them to be at the start of the year.
So Texas Tech back in action after a bye week down in Houston. 10.5 point spread. Now that's like the 4th highest spread, because BYU's big favorites over West Virginia, Arizona huge favorites over Oklahoma State, TCU 12.5 point favorites over Colorado. How much do you think the Red Raiders need to be on alert? How much of a game do you think Houston can actually give them?
Yeah, I mean, it's tough to gauge because of who Houston has played. Colorado, is that the best team they played? Is that a good gauge of where Houston is? I think it's obvious that Houston is a significantly better team than they were last year. What's amazing to me is that their defense is still this good. I mean, they lose to AJ Halsey, to LSU. They lose Sheil Wood, their defensive coordinator. And I mean, it's like Willie Fritz, his teams just consistently come on defense. They are, aggressive. They're, there's an attention to detail and understanding of what offenses are doing that shows you how prepared they are. I want to go back to your point, though, Craig, about the lines. And let me just ask you guys this as like an exercise, because we did this week, and I'm curious for your thoughts on this. Who's the best team in the SEC right now?
I think they have 7 or 8 really good ones, but I don't think right now we know if they have the alpha, that like the GOAT.
Right. but we could probably pretty quickly identify who the best teams are in the Big 12 right now.
Yeah.
It's weird. Is the SEC a league of parity? And will the SEC be penalized for being a league of parity in the same way that the Big 12 has seemingly been penalized for being a league of parity?
That's where
the lines is a pretty good indication. There are, I think, 4 double-digit lines going into the games this weekend. Like, that is not something we've seen within the Big 12. I mean, you go back and look last year, the last couple of years, like, you wouldn't see any double-digit lines in any of the Big 12 games, let alone 4 in the same weekend. And Houston is a good team. For them to be, double-digit dogs shows at home, shows the strength at the top of the Big 12 right now. So it's really interesting that nobody is talking about the SEC in the same vein that everybody had been talking about the Big 12. While I'm sure the SEC is cumulatively better, like, the idea that we don't know who the top dog is and don't really have any sense of that. I mean, it's in a given year been Alabama or Georgia. I think coming into the year, people thought it was Texas. So far, maybe it's Ole Miss. It's wild that the SEC is this wide open, and yet it's just a bunch of good teams, as opposed to the Big 12, which would do the exact same thing. And it was like, well, it's just a bunch of mid teams, and anybody can beat anybody in a given day. I think we're really being exposed to some of these false narratives around the Big 12. And if the Big 12, if it was hurt by parity over these last few years, well, this is certainly a year where that changes, because this is not as much of a league of parity right now. In West Virginia looks completely lost. We know how bad Oklahoma State is. And maybe there's another 1 or 2 other teams that might fit that bill in terms of being, bottom of the Big 12. So I think we're in a situation right now where the Big 12, is probably closer resembling what we've known for the SEC to be, and the SEC is probably closer resembling what the Big 12 is.
Yeah, I don't know if that's because of NIL, like in the case of Texas Tech, where they just create this advantage that can't be matched everywhere else, but it does feel like there's like 5 halves, and then there's like 3 or 4 halves. Like, if K-State loses this weekend, they're down near the bottom, right. and so, yeah, Colorado maybe is down there near the bottom, kind of where their temperature is right now, but this is why the strength of schedule is going to come in handy for the SEC, though. This is the brilliance, though, Ari, is like, now we're going to hear nothing about, see how difficult it's so parity-driven. Ole Miss and Bama and Georgia, they're all as good as each other. We need 10 teams in the playoff. Like, they know the narratives, man, and this year it's going to be that they're all just so good you can't separate them.
You're totally right. I mean, it's like the AP Top 25 is a good indication of that, right? I mean, it's all setting up for that. Like, we constantly heard, well, the Big 12 is just a bunch of mids. It's a league of parity. And now it'll be dressed up as a completely different way with the SEC. It's not parity. It's competitive balance. It's so many good teams. It's so many elite teams, and while there's probably some truth to that, I think, it wasn't as bad for the Big 12 as previously indicated, but at least it's now obvious to see how these narratives form and, what's been hurting the Big 12. And it's good to see that the Big 12 does have, at least in the early going, some semblance of, strength at the top. And I think it's, Iowa State is not a huge player in the NIL game, but, they've done exceedingly well in terms of, getting high-level talent. I think, having Brock Purdy was so huge for them because that helped them recruit Rocco Becht, and Rocco Becht's success of being I think, a better NFL quarterback than Brock Purdy is right now, will eventually be. I mean, Becht, to me, looks way better than Brock Purdy ever looked at Iowa State. So, that's going to only give the opportunity for another big-time quarterback to come in. So it's like it just keeps rolling downhill in terms of the quarterback position. And, when you've got great quarterback, it's easy to look really good. And I think they get great buy-in. Like, there's just something in the water there at Iowa State that allows Matt Campbell to not have to really play in the same pools in terms of talent acquisition as everybody else, and still make it on the other end and being a championship contender. Arizona State looks every bit as good as they were last year. They are now actually getting after the quarterback. They had 6 sacks this past week. I think they went like 5 weeks with 6 sacks last year. They could not get after the quarterback last year. Now they have 17 sacks for their first few games. So they're really getting after the quarterback, and they're way more multifaceted on offense. Now, obviously, Jordan Tyson is just an absolute beast, but I think more Shimon Mateer, Raleek Brown, like, they're starting to get a lot more emerging for Arizona State. I'd put the 4 best teams right now, as Iowa State, Arizona State, Texas Tech, and probably BYU. And I think of the 4, BYU is the one we know the least about, because from a strength of schedule standpoint, we just haven't seen them play, the elite of the elite. But I think that's good because, like, they're loaded, they're stacked. They've got a great running game. They've got a dominant offensive line. They've got the best defense in the Big 12, arguably, and the 2 best linebackers in the Big 12. The biggest question is number 47, their quarterback, but it's been, the schedule's worked out really well for them insofar as, he can kind of ease his way in. Like it's gotten harder and harder every week. So there's been like a ramp up period for BYU, which has really, really been beneficial for them. So, I think in terms of the 4 best teams of the conference, those are the 4 I'd put right now. But you could probably make a case for who number 4 is, because BYU hasn't really played, as tough a schedule as some of the other teams we just mentioned.
Ari, thank you. Every morning, of course, Big 12 Radio, Ari Temkin. Appreciate your time, young man.
You're the best, Smokey. Thank you. I'll be less of a diva, my friend.
No, you're good, man. Don't
more,
change.
More.
We need more.
More.
All right, Ari Temkin on Tuesdays with us.